Hi, I'm Len Epp from LeanPub, and in this LeanPub Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing Nico Josuttis. Based in the German city of Braunschweig, Nico is an independent system architect as well as an author, consultant, trainer, and technical manager, as well as a popular speaker. Nico is the author of a number of books, including the C++ Standard Library, C++ Templates, and SOA in Practice. And he recently published a book on LeanPub, C++ 17, The Complete Guide. The book covers the new language and library features of C++ 17 and how you can benefit in practice by combining new features and avoiding new traps. You can learn more about Nico from his website, josuttis.com, and you can follow him on Twitter at Nico Josuttis. In this interview, we're going to talk about Nico's background and career, his professional interests, his new book, and at the end, we'll talk a little bit about his experiences as both a conventionally published and now as a self-published author. So thank you, Nico, for being on the Front Matter podcast.
Thank you, Len, for giving me the opportunity to do so.
I always start these interviews by asking people to give a version of their origin story. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you grew up and how you first became interested in software and computers.
Let it say it that way. I was lazy. And the point was a friend from school once told me, you want to do something like electrotechnic or physics or so, do something easy, do computer science. And he convinced me. So I did it that way. I was not a hacker or geek or something like that. It was more that I thought, okay, if he tells me that seems to be appropriate, and it turned out it was, or at least it worked.
And where did you study computer science?
It's in Braunschweig. That's the reason I'm still living here. It's close to my hometown where I grew up in Göttingen. So I didn't went very far just for a living, but I've seen a lot in the world, of course, due to my work now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One question I always like to actually is kind of an unofficial theme of this podcast is when I encounter people who are in the software world is if you were starting out again now to pursue the same type of career, or if you were giving advice to someone who was in that situation, would you recommend a full university course of education in computer science, or would you recommend another path?
I think it doesn't matter, because we have enough demand for good people. So if people are good enough, they will make their way one way or the other. So do whatever you think is appropriate. I mean, I started with working for a company while I was studying, but my lifetime companion, she first studied something totally different and then changed the life or went more and more into IT. So both work very well. And also it seems that even my kids start with something totally different, like event management or so. And suddenly, at least my son is in a company who does IT events, and now things become interesting. So
yeah. Thanks for that very clear answer. I think you might be the first person who said it doesn't matter. Some people get very, very passionate one way or the other. So that's a refreshing response.
Well, you have to, if I can interrupt you here and say something more about it, the main thing is that the people are passionate and like what they do, and that they're pretty good, and that's all. That's enough but that's enough for more or less all the business you can join.
One of the pleasures of this podcast is I get to interview people from all around the world. I was just interviewing someone who was originally from Tunisia yesterday. So I have a German question for you. Mm-hmm. I know that until 2011, it was compulsory for men to serve in the military in Germany. And I have a friend from Kiel who, for whom his experience in the Navy was very transformative. Did you do military service?
No, I didn't. I was rejecting it. I should say that my father is working for the church, the Protestant, or what is the English word for not Catholic, the other way?
Protestant
church. So it's allowed. I'm not a secret kid. I'm a real kid. I should say it the other way around. My social life was highly impacted by going into youth club from the church, not to believe in God, but to learn about democracy and the way you have to live in the world and to make it a better place. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting to me. I come from a Mennonite background, and my grandfather on my mother's side was a conscientious objector in World War II. Mennonites are pacifist Protestants.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And they tend to not fight in wars.
Okay.
So I'm familiar with that principle. And I just one question about that, if you don't mind talking about it. What was the reception of this decision in Germany in 2011 to end compulsory military service?
Well, to some extent, money. I mean, there was simply not enough money now for the army to pay all the people going to there. So the period of working in the army, of the working in the army for everybody, so as part of your life for every man, became shorter and shorter. I think I did something like 2 years of service, and it became less than half a year or so. So it became a little bit ridiculous still to have it, and people were complaining about some were being taken and others were rejected, which seemed not to be fair. So I think this was, beside the general situation in the world after the Cold War, if somebody remembers, there was enough also support for this decision, I think.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that answer. So you worked for a company, I checked you out on LinkedIn. You worked for a company, I believe, until about 1999, and then you made the move to work sort of independently. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that decision. What led you to that move?
It seems I couldn't find a company that simply fits. I was working in a very small company. Bradex was about 10 people or 20 people. So I was starting to give their trainings and also even starting to write books there. And then I tried to do something different. But I also wanted to stay in Braunschweig. It was already in Braunschweig where I, as you said, started. And then I decided, I tried out a few things. Maybe I didn't sell very well myself, but so I met the right guys, 2 other guys who also started or had been started to get self-employed, which is a pretty unusual thing in Germany. It's not as common as in the US, for example. And I took the risk. I had 3 kids and a wife, and it was a lot of discussion, but it worked very well. Looking back, it changed, but it also changed my life, of course, because you live in a different world as a self-employed guy.
Yeah, and what proportion would you say of your time now do you spend kind of looking for clients as opposed to working for clients, or is that not how it works for you? Do they come to you?
Well, usually they come to me. Yeah, I would say looking for clients would be normally part of going to a conference, or maybe if it's a really bad time, send out some emails to some friends and say I'm available. If you're self-employed, you from time to time you go into this situation and saying I don't have any contract in the next half year. Oh, should I worry myself? And it still happens. It happened at the end of last year for me, but now I'm more or less booked out for the first quarter of this year. So this is, it worked. That's all I can say. And sorry.
One way I've seen people help to build out their profile is to publish books, which is something you got into. And I was wondering if you could talk about your first book. How did that arise?
I first have to remember what it was. I think it was programming, a German book about programming with OSF Motive and the X Windows system. I don't know if it says something to you. It was some revolution in areas where we didn't have Linux, and so we only had different Unix flavors in different companies. And it was written by the company, my first company by guys there. And because they were stuck having already 3 authors, they asked me as a 4th author to jump in. And then we finished the book. And that was the way it all began. And
And you've managed to be quite successful with some of your books. They've sold quite a few copies. And I was wondering, I mean, that's something that all authors who are on the other side of that experience want to be on your side. How did you get there?
Oh, by accident, of course. I mean, you can't plan to become a star or famous or earn some significant money if you write books. Usually, if you write books, it's just for your profession. You might let clients pay a little bit more because you are an author. That's all. And it happened a little bit accidentally because I initially wrote these books about C++, the C++ standard library in German. And then I came into contact with the International Standardization Committee, and then I sold the rights, the English rights again, back to Edison Wesley it was, which is now Pearson. And I had this luck that, first of all, C++ was pretty successful, and then this was I think, pretty well-written book, and everybody needed it on his or her desktop. So in the day-to-day work, it was not a book you read and then you give it away to the next person or so. So I have a couple of feedback where people say, this is one of the 5 books I never give away to anybody else because I need it in each and every day. And that, of course, helps. If what you write about is successful, if the book is more or less alone in the market, and if people need it every day, that's a very well combination. But I was lucky and I was not aware of that when I wrote it.
And can you talk a little bit about your latest book and why that's coming into existence and who it's for?
Yeah, it's about C++ 17, as you just said, and published with LeanPub. It's C++ has gained some momentum recently. I mean, the reason I have written a book about SOA, or service-oriented architecture, was that I left the C++ community a little bit and said, I have to do something different because I can't become an old C++ programmer and the young guys coming from university will know better about all the tricky details, etc. So I started with something new, and then with modern C++, which started with C++ 11, C++ regained some momentum. For example, the standardization committee meetings raised from 30 to 40 participants up to more than 100, even with a lot of young guys. And so, of course, the publisher came back to me and asked to write something or present a new edition, and I did. And now we publish C++ standards each and every 3 years. And I thought about should I spend the next book, and I heard about LeanPub from the Agile community because they do a couple of things there, and so I started to write. I started this as a test case, and the biggest concern I had was I want to have control about this book. Which of course I have, but in the way I write it and the way I can lay out it and publish it. So the first thing I wrote a script transferring my LaTeX source macros into your style, which is, I forgot the name. Markdown, Markdown.
We call it the current. We've got Lean Pub flavored Markdown, and then something we're working on called Markua. Actually, I've got a couple of questions to ask you about this, but if we could just go back a little bit and talk about C++. So you talked about C++ 11 and C++ 17, and as I understand it, those are years. And so when you said every 3 years, so there was C++ 11, and then there would have been C++ 14 and C++ 17, and there's a standardization committee. And I just wanted to ask you a little bit about how that works, because I think a lot of people might not be aware of how a language like this is maintained and how it changes over time. I'm certainly one of them. So if you could explain a little bit about what is the standardization committee, how do you get on it, that kind of thing, because it's just so fascinating, and people are mostly familiar with things like how, say, the English language generally gets kind of standardized, and it's that the language just kind of lives. People are doing new things all the time, and then there would be authoritative bodies like, the Oxford English Dictionary Committee, who would then decide from this vast jungle what kind of new thing to pull out and make official usage, but obviously, a programming language works very differently from that. So, if you could talk a little bit about that, that would be really great.
Yeah, thanks for giving that opportunity. I do it very often in the trainings because it explains a little bit about the situation C++ is in. So it's a community-driven programming language. So originally, the founder, Bjarne Stjulstrup, invented it for AT&T, but then he decided that this should become an international standard, which formally means that you have an ISO committee, which means, for example, that the subgroup of this is ANSI. In Germany, it would be DIN, and in UK, it would be BSI. So every country has formally a delegation, and formally we vote at the end in favor of a standard, and the goal is to have common agreement. It's not that you can get a new standard by having something like 10 against 9 votes or so. But that's only the formal background. The informal background is that all the operational work is done just by meeting 3 times a year, and then everybody, even people not attending, can propose a change to this language. And you don't even have to explain it. I mean, you have to only convince people that they vote for it. And if there's enough agreement that we should go in that direction, we do it. And sometimes the agreement goes into different directions or follow different design ideas. So therefore, we have some confusion. Sometimes it takes a long time because 100 people and having some common agreement means that there are not too many people disagreeing with the proposal. That's a problem we have right now. So it's community driven. There is no general chief architect or programming architect behind, which is good and bad. It takes us more time. Sometimes we go a little bit crazy, especially with consistency. And but in general, it helps. I mean, more or less 100 people and more standardize. And if somebody complains about the quality of C++, I always answer, it's your fault, because you haven't been there to make it better.
And how do you get onto one of these committees?
You just join. Just come to the meetings. There's an official website called isocpp.org. You will find out when the meetings are. You should tell us in ahead because we have to prepare a little bit of lunch. But everybody is welcome. And you can join, and there are people who very fast get attracted and respected in this group because, just come and listen and talk and help, and that's all.
One thing I read preparing for this interview was that there are criticisms of C++ that it's overly complex. And I think I understand a little bit better now what some of those criticisms are based on. I sort of found some kind of snarky comments about how it's kind of everybody just kind of gets what they want in the end, and then people end up using, if I have to get this correctly, people end up what they actually use of C++ in their own work is a subset of it. But then you can end up with people using one sort of part of the language as opposed to another part that someone else is using to do something similar, if that makes sense. What's your response to that point of
First of all, I would not agree with what you said. Okay. I would fully agree that the language is complex, but I would not agree with the reasoning, and maybe I gave the wrong impression. Remember that I say we have to have common agreement for changes. And that means that you have 5 groups, each one is 10% or 20%, and everybody proposes something, and then we have 5 different things in the standard. It doesn't work that way. Okay. We have for each and every contribution, we have to convince the major majority of all the others to live and go that path. And then finally, there in the working groups, we have different groups. So some are for new features, some are for maintenance, both for the core language and the library. They are the guys who implement it, both the compilers or the library. They have enough experience to care for consistency, etc. Yes, we make mistakes, but we make mistakes just like every other software project. I would say the biggest problem we have is backward compatibility, as so often in software, which means, we are compatible to C, and that's already a problem for some things, and it gets, of course, worse and worse. The language grows, we come up with cool new ideas, but we can't give up backward compatibility. Otherwise, you run into a situation where, for example, the Python community was split into 2 different Python versions just because the change they made was not backward compatible and too big.
Thanks for that answer. I feel like I understand the situation a lot better now. It's just a fascinating structure to me. Going back to your book, you were mentioning...
Len,
yeah.
One thing maybe I should say.
Sure.
You learn something that is very important in these times. You learn how you work together with different opinions, finding compromises and finding results where everybody can live with. And I have to say that we live in times where we see some signs that we lose this ability to work together and constructive together, and joining an international group of people with very different experience and opinions helps you to learn the lessons necessary to go back on this path, which is necessary for progress of mankind in general, I think.
Yeah, that reminds me, I was listening to an interesting podcast actually about the effects of polarization on just groups working together. And that as you know, there can be a kind of snowball effect where people get hardened and hardened and hardened, and then it working together becomes kind of impossible. So I appreciate your comment very much. It also gets to the heart of a sort of a criticism that people often have of democracy, that because it's premised on a group of people finding some way to cooperate in an environment of disagreement, it can often mean that you don't get what you want as quickly as you might if simply your group had a powerful leader that could issue orders and then things were done. But of course, the democratic answer to that is that you're not going to end up with a good outcome in the end if a single will is driving.
If the single will is a good driver, I'm not sure about that. To be honest, I'm just don't know. The problem is, my experience is, if you have a good driver, and that sooner or later you lose the ground of what you decide. And that's a problem. And we see that I, for example, fall into traps again and again just because I'm more than 20 years involved into C++. And then there come some young guys and tell me, but it's that way or that can be done. And then I say, yes, you're right. Okay. And that's the important thing. So some leadership I can live with, but constructive feedback is a major part you need.
Speaking of being driven by a single will, getting back to your book, one of the things that drives people often brings them to LeanPub and to other self-publishing services is that they get to have a lot of control over what they do and don't necessarily have, you lose some of the benefits that come from working with a big publisher, but you gain a lot of independence. And you did something special with your book that you were just getting into when I brought you back to the issue of C++, which is that you wrote a script that lets you write in LaTeX so that you can produce a kind of what I would call a highly formatted PDF, but that also lets you output your LaTeX to LeanPub's book generators so you can use our system to make EPUB and Mobi versions. And I was wondering what was behind that. Obviously, there's a lot of work and thought that goes into a process like that. What was behind that decision? Was it it was very important for your project to have a good-looking PDF?
Yes, I think a good layout is key for good books. And I would say that Markdown is not good enough for the way I want to control and present things. It's not the problem of Markdown. It's just simple things like I need 3 different ways for spacing from one sentence and then having some code and then continue the sentence. Sometimes I need short spacing around the code, sometimes longer, sometimes after the code there is a paragraph involved, etc. So I have different ways. Is this code part of the sentence? Is the sentence in the head just introducing the code, or is the code totally isolated, etc.? And for this kind of things, I have for my books different LaTeX macros. So and I don't have this flexibility in Markdown. So you always have the same distance between a sentence and a piece of code, and that makes reading more difficult, I think.
Yeah, thanks for that very specific answer. Of course, we know about that because it wasn't working It wasn't working quite perfectly, and we had to do a little bit of work to make it work, which we were happy to do. One of the things I should explain to anyone listening is that, like, sometimes we have people who, for whom it's very important that they have their PDF be, as it were, kind of pixel perfect. Other people come to us with EPUB files, and so then that's the thing that they try to make perfect. And so what we built was a feature that lets you. It's not a very well known feature, but it lets you upload. Say one of those files like a PDF, but then also use a separate manuscript to generate EPUB and Mobi files for sale as well, which can be really, really helpful. So it helps you reach a wider community, and people give people all those formats that they want and maybe expect, even if you intend to push them in the direction of the one that you think is best. And so you chose to publish your book in progress. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that decision.
Well, first of all, I had to get used to this idea. As I said, the Agile community does it pretty often. I mean, that's iterative development. So it's just a consequent application of this idea of iterative publishing. I like it very much. I don't want to miss it. And if 2 or 3 times I was asked by traditional publishers already, what was the benefit I got from LeanPub? And I said this iterative publishing is the biggest benefit I see they can do. I mean, there's another thing that it has to do with some money. I mean, with royalties, etc. So there are different models how you sell the books and who owns the money, etc. But the biggest thing traditional publishers could learn is a way to publish books iteratively, because without this feature, the book was published in December of last year. I would say publishing the book would have been taken one more year. And in this one more year, first of all, readers can benefit because more than half is done, and this is a very useful part of the book. It helps people, especially those parts are done which are already available in C++ compiler. So I don't have to present all the details of those parts not available yet. And then I get feedback. I get very early, very good feedback, and so I can improve the content. And finally, of course, I get early money, which is also not as bad. So I get some revenue early. And by the way, this early revenue also is some pressure because they already paid for a full book, so I have to finish it, and that helps.
Yeah, you actually answered one of my questions there already that I hadn't asked you yet, which is engaging directly with people who have bought your book important to you, and obviously. It is. That is one of the. It's funny you've managed to cover a lot of the ground that LeanPub authors go through very well, which is not only the sort of the excitement of the early money, but the obligation that one often feels, and also the excitement that one can get from building up readers of a project before it's finished, which can help motivate you to work on it in other ways. How is it that you're interacting with your early adopter readers?
Well, first of all, I had some traditional reviewers. So I had some people in the community. I asked, do you wanna or do you mind to review the book before it gets published, even here in this platform? So before a significant first part is published. And then I just get feedback from readers. It's not as much as I thought, by the way, but it's well, I get it, I would say. So it's not that it's I wouldn't say it's better or more than for a traditional book. It's just like that I get it earlier. I mean, before the full book is done.
And are they emailing you? Or are they? Do you have
the usual way? The usual way is surprisingly using the LeanPub feedback channel. There must be something to use the LeanPub system to send me an email or send me a message. You know it better than me. So
yeah, I think what you're probably describing is that when you publish a new version of a LeanPub book, you also have the opportunity to send a message to your readers. And so, well, we don't recommend doing that if you've, fixed a typo, but if you have added significant content, that you can send an email to your readers using our system in a way that doesn't expose your email address to them, and then they can reply to you, I believe is probably what you're describing.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. We also have discuss forums that people can use. Oh, and then there's also an email the author feature. I forgot about that. That might be what you're talking
and
about.
That's the one.
Yeah.
So yes, I get a message from LeanPub saying a message from a reader of, and then the book title. Yeah.
Okay.
And there comes the most feedback I get.
Oh, thanks. That's really interesting. That feature is a little bit hidden. You kind of have to scroll down the book's landing page to see an email the author link. So I'm happy to hear that people are finding it. That's great.
You can improve that if you like.
Oh yeah, well, no, we definitely plan to. We're doing work on community is something that's really important to us, and actually, we've you might not have noticed it, but in LeanPub, you'll notice a little bell has appeared at the top right of the screen if you're signed in, and so that's notifications that we built in.
Oh, okay.
And so that will be right now. What happens is someone can get a notification there if an author publishes a new version of a book and sends a message. And you'll get the download links right there. But this will obviously we're all familiar with the little red dots on bells that are notifying us of things that have happened. And so there's going to be a bit more of that happening in LeanPub, which will hopefully help people interact with each other. My last question is a bit of a selfish one, but if there was one thing about LeanPub that we could build for you, or if there was one thing that we could improve that we haven't talked about already, what would that? Can you think of anything?
Well, you mean not talked about already in this interview, probably, because I have talked with some guys of you already, proposing a few things. I think the most important thing we need is we as authors of programming languages need is a way to self-define syntax highlighting. Because that was almost a showstopper, that the syntax highlighting of C++ you use is really way behind. It's even before C++ 11, and I'm writing a book about C++ 17. So the wrong words are not highlighted. And
I see.
And I really need an interface for that, because I think in general you have the problem. People write new books about new things, so new keywords come therein, and they need a new way of syntax highlighting, and you can't use the general syntax highlighting rules of the existing books and the existing standards, or because you describe something new. So I think this is something you really should introduce to give people who write programming books more success with describing new things that are coming.
Yeah, thanks very much. That's really interesting. As you're saying, often LeanPub books are kind of cutting edge. It's one of the reasons that the iterative publish early, publish often thing works. If you're showing programming code, you can't. The system you're using won't know to highlight new words unless that system has been updated. And if I understand, just to be precise, what you're asking for is the ability for you as the user to actually, set the highlighting for these new words if the system that we're using isn't caught up to the latest and greatest, or even what might be coming in the future.
Yeah, I mean, you have a system for the syntax highlighting you use. I forgot the name, what it was.
Pigments with the Y.
Yeah, and they have syntax files, and it's a Python tool as far as I know, and all I need is a way to say, here's my syntax tool, which describes a completely new language, which is C++ 20 for the next book, and the book should immediately follow that rules. Of course, error handling is an issue, but I think this is very important, because wrong or confusing syntax highlighting is really counterproductive for a book.
Yeah, we've heard from some pretty passionate authors about that issue in the past. So I thank you for telling us about the weaknesses that are still there. Well, thanks very much, Nico, for taking some time out of your evening to talk to me today. I really appreciate it. And thanks for being on the podcast and for using LeanPub for your latest book. We were really excited when you showed up.
Yeah, thanks, Len. I want to thank you for this platform. I think in general it worked very well. I had some time to try it out, and then I decided to go that way. I'm very happy. I still use and can use my own macros, and that way it works very well. So once you have new features, I can immediately update these macros and generate a new tool. That's also a cool thing. So thank you very much for your platform and all your work, and of course for giving me the opportunity to talk to you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. We really appreciate the kind words. Thanks.